I'll start off with a message from the Secretary-General. As you may have seen this morning, he was awarded, co-awarded rather, the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity. The Secretary-General said it was an honor to receive the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity, and he said he knows this is also recognition of the work of the United Nations to advance peace and human dignity every day and everywhere. He also congratulated this year's other awardee, Latifa in Ziaten of France. Her dedicated efforts to support young people and promote mutual understanding arising out of immense personal tragedy have won admirers at home and beyond. Discrimination, racism, and extremist violence are surging across the globe, he said, and as the world faces the COVID-19 pandemic, an economic crisis, a climate emergency, and threats to peace, unity, and solidarity are more important now than ever. There must be no room for hatred in the future we are striving to build. The Secretary-General also said that this is also very much in the spirit of the path-breaking efforts of His Holiness Pope Francis and His Eminence of the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, to advance their interfaith dialogue and promote our common humanity. The award will inspire as we continue that vital work. In that spirit, the Secretary-General has decided to donate the prize money, $500,000 that's $500,000, to the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees to buttress its indispensable efforts to protect the most vulnerable members of the human family, the forcibly displaced. A bit of an update on the ground from our colleagues in Myanmar, who are obviously watching the situation very closely with concern. We have more than 2,500 personnel in Myanmar, both international and national staff, providing crucial development and humanitarian support to the people of Myanmar in their pursuit of democracy, peace, human rights, and the rule of law. As we have told you yesterday, the UN in Myanmar has also been providing significant support to the public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The latest developments in Myanmar, political developments, come at a particularly difficult time for the country, with it experiencing a public health emergency with significant socio-economic impacts. The first vaccines arrived in Myanmar only last week, and the response to the COVID-19 pandemic must remain a priority for the foreseeable future. We're also providing humanitarian assistance to more than 1 million people in Myanmar. And as you saw yesterday in a note we issued on Yemen and the Safar tanker, we explained that we have requested the Houthi de facto authorities in Yemen to provide a letter with security assurances in order for us to deploy a team to the Safar tanker. We regret that to date we have not received a response to our multiple requests of the letter. Without the letter, the cost of the mission would increase by hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're also very concerned by the indications that the Houthi de facto authorities are considering a, quote, review of their formal approval of the mission to deploy. Houthi officials have advised that the UN to pause certain preparations for pending the outcome of such a process, which will create further delay for the mission. In light of these challenges, the timeline of deployment of the mission for the tanker remains uncertain and dependent on the continued facilitation of all stakeholders involved. We hope to receive renewed commitment from the Houthi de facto authorities to resolve this urgent matter as soon as possible. Any other outcome would be extremely disappointing. And on Ethiopia, we also issued a statement yesterday from the Secretary-General saying he remains seriously concerned over the situation in Tigray. He attaches strong importance to the partnership between the government of Ethiopia and the United Nations through the country team in addressing the acute humanitarian needs of all affected population. He underlined the need for continued urgent steps to alleviate the humanitarian situation and extend protection to all those at risk in Tigray. In this context, he welcomes the positive engagement of the government during the recent visits by senior UN officials. These included the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, the head of UN Safety and Security, Gilles Michaud, as well as the Executive Director of the World Food Programme. These engagements, undertaken in line with the Secretary-General's call to the government for sustained, impartial, and unimpeded humanitarian access to affected areas in Tigray region and to internally displaced persons and refugee camps. Staying in the region, the Secretary-General's Special Representative for Somalia, James Swan, visited Hargeisa in Somaliland. He met with Muse Bihi Abdi and other senior government officials, members of civil society, and the National Electoral Committee. Mr. Swan said he was pleased to be able to discuss the work of the UN in Somaliland and to help address practical issues affecting its people. Our partnership dates back to 1991, he said, adding, we have remained committed since then through the most difficult times and better times. Mr. Swan noted that the UN's support is wide-ranging. This includes humanitarian and development aid. While in Hargeisa, he also visited a World Food Program, operating nutrition and medical center. More information on the internet. Turning to Afghanistan, a report released today by the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and the UN Human Rights Office warns that allegations by detainees of torture in Afghanistan detention facilities continue at high rates. The report also notes that the procedural rights of those detained are largely ignored. According to the report, almost a third of people detained for security or terrorism-related offenses in Afghanistan have been subject to torture or other forms of ill treatment. Also to note on the country, our humanitarian team warns that the number of people in need in the country has doubled from 9.4 million at the start of 2020 to 18.4 million at the start of 2021. 4 in 10 people in Afghanistan are now going hungry, which means that almost 17 million people are in crisis or emergency levels of food insecurity through March 2021. According to our humanitarian colleagues, almost half of all children will be acutely malnourished in Afghanistan. I was also asked about the latest developments in Russia, and I can tell you that out of Geneva, the UN Human Rights Office urged the Russian authorities to immediately release all those detained for exercising their rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and expression over the past few weeks of protests across the country. The Human Rights Office added they are deeply dismayed by the sentencing of Alexei Navalny yesterday. The Secretary-General fully subscribes to the statement made by the High Commissioner's office. And Errol asked me about hate speech in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I can tell you that we reject any form of hate speech, denial of war crimes, and genocide, as well as the glorification of convicted war criminals in Bosnia-Herzegovina and elsewhere. The Secretary-General, as you'll recall, in the message he delivered last year for the 25th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accord, stressed that building a future of peace requires dealing with the past. It means acknowledging the horrific crimes were committed during the war. The Secretary-General emphasized that those crimes should never be forgotten, nor should the ideology of the perpetrators be celebrated. Hate speech or narratives of mistrust and fear have no place in an inclusive, peaceful Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this morning, the Secretary-General delivered remarks via pre-recorded video to the Brave New Ocean high-level virtual event organized by UNESCO. This is to launch the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. He said that as we recover from the pandemic and achieve the SDGs, we must stop degrading our environment that we depend on. He said that restoring the ocean's ability to nurture humanity and regulate the climate is a defining challenge. It will influence the outcome of our efforts to stem biodiversity loss, implement the Paris Agreement, and meet the promise of the SDGs. Our colleagues in Geneva at WHO announced today that Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, and many other things, including founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, will continue for a third term as WHO's global ambassador for non-communicable diseases and injuries. I want to flag an interesting initiative called Music Against Child Labor, which was launched as a competition to mark the UN International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Musicians of all genres are invited to submit a song to inspire government stakeholders to take action to eliminate child labor, which affects nearly 1 in 10 children worldwide. According to the ILO, child labor has decreased by almost 40% over the last 2 decades. However, COVID-19 pandemic is threatening to reverse this progress, and I think we referred to it in the report by UNODC yesterday. You can find more information about the competition and how to enter on the ILO website. I look forward to all of your submissions. Tomorrow we will be joined from Bangui by Denise Brown, the Deputy Special Representative of the head of the Peacekeeping Mission in Central African Republic. She will brief virtually and give us an update on the situation there. And I expect a Secretary-General statement on the situation in the CAR in the coming hours. And just a sad note, and I wanted to pay tribute here to Timur Goksel, the longtime face and voice of the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, who passed away from COVID-19 earlier this week. We send our condolences to his family and many friends around the world. Although Timur only signed on to be with UNIFIL for 6 months, he stayed with the peacekeeping mission for 24 years. He served as UNIFIL spokesman from 1979 and then as senior advisor from 1995 until he retired in 2003. And even after that, he spoke as university lecturer in Beirut about the UN's peacekeeping work. I know on a personal note, both Fahan and myself relied heavily on his expertise for many years to get the latest information from UNIFIL. It's hard to imagine a world without a sage advice and wry outlook. We will miss him. And I do want to thank both Hungary and Malaysia for their payments in budget into the regular budget due, but for their too many words today. I want to thank Hungary and Malaysia for their full payment to the 2021 regular budget. The honor roll now stands at 28. Edie.
Thank you, Steph, and may I add my condolences to Timur Goksel's family and friends. He certainly was a very important part of a very important story and very well liked by the journalistic community. I have two questions. First, what is the Secretary-General's reaction to the charges against Aung San Suu Kyi and of basically having walkie-talkies in her house, which is punishable by 3 years in prison, and also the charges against the president? And then I have one more question.
Look, we continue and will continue to call for her immediate release, for the president's immediate release, and all others who have been detained by the military in the last few days. I think the charges filed against her just compound the undermining of the rule of law in Myanmar and the democratic process.
Second question is on what you said about Alexei Navalny, that the Secretary-General echoes what the High Commissioner for Human Rights said, which was that she was dismayed by the sentence, but being dismayed by the sentence doesn't actually equate to calling for Navalny's release.
Well, I would refer you to what the High Commissioner said, which was that this was part of a case that already had been criticized by the European Courts of Human Rights. So I would just stick to what she said. Mr. Bays, your question.
Yes, so a couple of further follow-ups. On the Safa tanker, who from the UN is dealing with the Houthis on this? Is Martin Griffiths? You didn't mention him in the statement. Is he the person who's dealing with this?
There are different people who are dealing with the de facto authorities, whether from our humanitarian colleagues, Mr. Griffiths' office, and the UN Office for Project Services, which is managing the project. It's a whole of UN effort, a team effort.
Well, what's the whole of UN? I mean, you read the statement. What's the whole of the UN
well, I mean,
feeling on this? I mean, you must be frustrated.
I think frustrated is underplaying the situation. There's more than 1 million barrels of oil on that tanker. We have often underscored the risk of a major ecological disaster and, frankly, a major economic disaster for the people who live off the water, not only in Yemen, but in countries in the region. And that explains, I think, our level of frustration.
And your statement you put out on Tigray, I know that's going to be subject to an AOB in the Security Council this afternoon, and Mr. Lowcock is going to be briefing. But if you could just give us, an indication of what the UN is trying to get into Tigray in terms of personnel, in terms of permissions, visas, in terms of supplies, and how much is being allowed in.
Very little is being allowed in. I mean, there was a convoy that was allowed in for to reach some of the UNHCR camps. What we need is to be able to just get in there in an unfettered manner without having to, I guess, negotiate for every truck, for every box. We work cooperatively with the government, and it's their country, and it is we have to go through them, and that's the way it should be. But there is a grave humanitarian need in Tigray, and at this point, we're not able to reach the people that need to be reached. Ray, then we'll go to Mr. Sato on the screen.
Thank you, Stephane. Regarding the Safar tank, we know that the Houthis are obstructing the UN work, and also they're getting arms from Iran, according to a statement from the UN team of specialists. Do you plan any sanctions against them? And also have another question regarding yesterday's Security Council meeting. There was no common statement after that meeting. I mean, we just want to know what happened yesterday.
Sure.
Are there any disagreements or what?
The fact that there's no common statement is a statement of fact on your part. The special envoy, I think, in the remarks that were shared with you, called for a strong and unified voice from the Security Council. I think that is something we would like to see. Why that hasn't happened? I mean, I think that's for you to ask 15 people who sit around that table. On the Safar tanker, I mean, you've raised bigger issues. The issues of sanctions is obviously up to the Security Council. Mr. Griffiths is continuing his political work to try to get a political agreement, a nationwide ceasefire, to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Yemen. He is continuing on that track, and he will continue to do so. You have a follow-up? If you could sit not behind the screen, because it's hard for me to look to see you.
Will you still deal with this de facto?
Listen, we deal, and this is not just in Yemen, in any conflict where we're involved as a negotiator, facilitator, mediator, whatever term you want to use, we deal with de facto authorities. We deal with the people we need to deal with. It doesn't, and this is a general term, it does not imply recognition. It doesn't imply that we accept what they do. But we need to, if you are negotiating peace, you need to talk to the people who are involved in conflict, whoever they are. Mr. Sato, and I see you, Errol. Mr. Sato.
Thank you, Stephane. My question on nuclear disarmament. Today, U.S. and the Russian government announced the extension, 5-year full of extension on New START treaty. So no doubt, Secretary-General has long requested for this extension. But does Secretary-General have specifically expect from the future participation of China for arms control?
Look, I think it is, first of all, I would say that we very much welcome the extension, the 5-year extension of the New START as a means of maintaining verifiable limits on the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And I think as a first step of reinvigorating the arms control, the nuclear arms control regime. From our point of view, we encourage both Russia and the United States to use these next 5 years to negotiate further reductions in their nuclear weapons, as well as new agreements that can address the emerging nuclear weapons challenges of our time and make the world a better place. It is clear that the more nuclear weapons the more countries that have nuclear weapons engage in disarmament talks and move towards a world free of nuclear weapons, the better we will all be. Benno, and then we'll go to Errol.
Thank you, Steph. I have a follow-up on Myanmar. Were you able to establish connections to the authorities in Myanmar, and do you have any contact to Aung San Suu Kyi and other detainees and know anything about their being?
No, we're very concerned about their well-being, given the concern about well-being of anyone who is in detention. But on top of that, we're in a pandemic, as we all know. So that adds another level of concern. I'm not aware that we've been able to reach her or anyone else directly, nor that we've been able to speak to the highest level of the military. But our special envoy will continue to speak, to try to speak, to establish contact with whoever she needs to speak to. Okay, Errol, and we'll go to Nabil. And Pam, sorry, I see Pam as well. Errol?
You hear me now, don't you?
I hear you, I see you, just like Tommy. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. I can only assume that this afternoon or in the evening is going to be main headline in Bosnia and probably in the region. But I have another question. Probably you noticed that Denmark announced that they are going to move with some kind of digital passport on the COVID vaccination. I asked you before, from the point of view of human rights, what is the opinion of the Secretary-General? You did give me an answer. Would you a little bit elaborate more on that as a sign of time or so? And I have another question, if you...
It clearly is a sign of the times. Listen, I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak on the Danish move, but I think what we would need to underscore is that whatever requirements member states put in place is done in a way that is coordinated globally. I think it would not help us getting out of the economic impact of this pandemic if member states were going to go it alone with different restrictions. And we've seen what happens when that happens. And obviously, being in the digital sphere, that issues of human rights and privacy be addressed as well. Your second question.
Yeah, yesterday, Iftikhar asked you if there are any kind of reaction or signals from the Rohingya community regarding the events in Myanmar. Do you have anything today and to be put in context?
Go ahead. No, I mean, I don't, we don't speak for the Rohingya refugees. They are able to speak for themselves. So, I mean, I've seen press reports from the UN side, from UNHCR side, from our humanitarian colleagues. We are there to support them and help them. Our concern, obviously, is that we are now moving further back from any eventual return in safety, dignity, and voluntary. But how they feel is a question they need to answer, that you need to ask them directly. Okay, Nabil and then Pam.
Thank you, Steph. So we expect the Secretary-General to address the General Assembly tomorrow. I think it's a meeting on the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Does the Secretary-General see a new window of or maybe opportunity after the new policy announced by the U.S. government on the Middle East peace process? Where does he stand on this now? And should we expect any meeting for the quartet in the near future? Is he pushing for such a meeting?
Look, I think the Secretary-General and I expressed some hope for the Middle East peace process when he was here last week. I think last week, it seems like a lifetime ago, last week to answer your question. So I think his opinion has not changed on that front. And as for the quartet, we have been advocating for a quartet meeting. We still very much hope that that will happen. Pam?
Thank you, Steph. Just back to the Safar oil vessel. You've answered a lot on it, but last July, the experts told the UN that the Safar was could be an environmental catastrophe of epic proportions if there were not swift access to the aging and leaking oil storage vessel. My question to you is was there any mitigation? Is it still leaking the same way? Do you have any sense of how close to a disaster this is? Thank you.
Part of the issue is to really assess the situation is to get there. And the plan had been to send a team there to do both some mitigation, but also look at more in depth what we needed to do. It's not a matter of just dropping people, from a helicopter. It's a matter of getting the right technical ships that we need to lease or to rent, people with the right skills. It's a very delicate operation. And as I said, you have an aging and rusting oil tanker with more than 1 million barrels of oil, about 8 kilometers off the coast of Yemen. It's a huge risk. It can have a huge ecological impact.
Thank you.
Okay, James.
So I missed the end of yesterday afternoon's briefing because the President of the Security Council was speaking at the same time. So this may have been asked, but I'm going to ask it and tell me if you've already answered. News in the Lancet Medical Journal that the Sputnik 5 vaccine is considered safe and efficient. You remember that President Putin offered the UN that vaccine. What happened to that offer? And is the Secretary-General thinking of taking up that offer in any way here at headquarters or anywhere else the UN operates, given that the vaccine seems to be pretty effective?
Yeah, we are continuing to be in discussion really through WHO because we would take vaccines that have been cleared by WHO. But obviously, I think this is very welcome news on yet another vaccine, and I think we need to salute the scientists around the world who've done amazing work in the last year.
And another question for you relates to Somalia, where clearly the election timetable is getting very urgent and very worrying, given that there's supposed to be presidential elections that don't look like they're going to happen in 5 days' time on February the 8th. How concerned is the UN about the situation that there doesn't really seem to be a way forward after February the 8th? And could you, give us some comment now, and perhaps could you arrange some access to SRSG Swan? Because it sounds like
I think our concern is very real and very great on the slipping of the calendar and the impact that it would have on Somalia, on the people of Somalia. And we will try to see if Mr. Swan is available to come to you. James Reinl. James?
Oh, hi, Stephane. Thanks so much. You've spoken quite a lot about the Safar oil tanker a few times today, and your comments about it are very, very strong. I'm just wondering that given how seriously the UN perceives this risk of the tanker rupturing to be, and the fact that you've gotten so close to it and the Houthis aren't going to let you access the tanker, have you, even at a provisional level, the Secretary-General assessed whether or not he might recommend to the Security Council for a request for use of force under Chapter 7 to access the tanker, to drain the oil out of it and to remove it from the sea?
I can't tell you that that's a discussion that I'm aware that has taken place, and I think we can all imagine, and I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to start speculating, but I'm not aware that that's a conversation that has been had, to my knowledge. Excellent. There's no Brendan today, but hopefully there'll be a Brendan tomorrow. There will be a me tomorrow, and we shall see. Sorry?
I have a question.
Yes, who's that?
Mohsen from
Yes, Mohsen, sorry, I didn't see your name in the chat. Please, go ahead.
Sorry. As you know, in 2018, the ICJ issued an order regarding Iran-US case. But they tried to obey the court order and impose unlawful sanctions on Iran. Also, the US new administration is still working in the same way. What's Secretary-General's position regarding the order of ICJ, and does he have any recommend to administration in this regard?
We have taken note of and seen the decision by the International Court of Justice, which, as you know, is one of the principal organs of the United Nations. It's not for the Secretary-General to comment on those decisions. The ICJ is a pillar of the international multilateral system, but they are an independent body. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hasta mañana.
Bye-bye.
What? Sorry? No, I mean, he's just...